150 years ago, in the jungles of Central America, European explorers came upon the ruins of a vanished civilization. In the solemn stillness of the forest, wrote one, the monuments were like sacred things, like divinities mourning over a fallen people. The builders of these pyramids, the Maya, had achieved astonishing feats of astronomy, science, and mathematics. They had invented writing independently of the Old World. Such sites, said their discoverer, were like a newly found history, proving that the ancient peoples of the Americas had not been savages, but had equaled the finest monuments of the ancient Egyptians. So much about them seemed totally original, and yet they were also intriguing clues from a deeper common past of all humanity. Central America was unique in that up till the time of the Spanish conquest, it had no contact at all with the other civilizations of the Old World. And yet, if we compare the Maya with the ancient Chinese, the similarities of belief and practice and symbol suggest that the peoples of the Americas never quite lost that deep connection with their prehistoric origins in Asia. The Maya shared with the Chinese the fundamental belief that civilization and humankind are not set apart from nature, but part of a natural order whose workings it is the human duty and the human interest to understand. And like the Chinese, the Maya did this through divination, shamanism, and through intellectual and moral control. At the core of the Mayan view of civilization was an all-consuming obsession with time. Time measured in vast recurring cycles of hundreds of millions of years. Longer indeed than the universe is known to have existed. The Greeks explored the cosmos through geometry, the Hindus through metaphysics, the Maya through the mathematics of eternity. Mexico City, the largest city on Earth. Since the landing of Columbus in 1492, two conceptions of civilization have fought for the soul of the peoples of the Americas. The one foreign and recent, that of the West. The other ancient and native. In the last 500 years, despite genocide and forcible conversion, the spiritual conquest of the Native Americans has never taken place. For all this time, they have tenaciously held on to their old languages, their old beliefs, their old views of the cosmos and of time, keeping faith, as they would put it, with their ancient future. It's dawn in Chichicastenango, Guatemala. Chichi is one of the market towns in the highlands of the Quiche Maya. In Guatemala, the majority of the people are still Indian and still speak the language of the ancient pre-Columbian civilization here, the Maya. In front of the Church of St. Thomas, travellers burn copal incense, asking forgiveness from the Mayan spirit guardians at the door. All around the market, you can pick out the home regions of the traders by their woven jackets. The bat is a symbol from the ancient Mayan underworld, worn by the last dynasty of the Cacique Maya. Today it's the emblem of the township of Solola. The designs on the women's clothes are the most elaborate, carrying coded information about family and lineage. In such ways that people have preserved part of the pattern of the old Mayan universe. Here in Chichi, the traditional civic rituals are kept up by the religious guilds, the cofradías. They hark back to pre-Columbian times, organizing the festival days here, both Christian and Mayan. In fact, it was through the cofradías here in 1702 that Europeans were allowed to see and copy the only known manuscript of the Mayan Genesis, the Popul Vuh. Down the middle of their church are Mayan altars for the ancestors, the shamans, and the midwives. The prayers of the cofradías might stand as a text for all the native peoples of the Americas. These rituals of worship, they say, were handed down from our first ancestors and never lost, despite the Spanish conquest. Don't expect us to give up these customs, Father Christ. For us, only names and fortunes change. In the hills above Mamostenango is the house of a Mayan shaman, Andres Shiloh. Andres is a living link with the pre-Spanish world. A priest for nearly 50 years. He's a chuchcahao, a lineage head, literally a mother-father. He's also a day keeper, a guardian of the Mayan calendar. Andres uses sacred divination as a tool to probe the ills of his patients, to feel their past and future. He lays out the coral tree seeds and crystals. According to the days of the Mayan calendar, a 260-day cycle based, so the Quiche believe, on the gestation period of the human baby within the womb. Now, Don Andres understands this by the way in which the beans are, the arrangement in which they lie. Or?
Entonces usted entiende eso porque por la colocación del
exactly.
That's how, exactly how he understands it. Estos son los nombres de los
Over the last few years, I've travelled to many parts of the world, and everywhere, pretty much, you see destruction of the environment and war and so on. People are making an enemy of the earth. How does Don Andres view that from the Mayan tradition?
Está diciendo el Señor que ha viajado mucho en todo el mundo.
Que se llama el enemigo del mundo es, ¿cómo se llama? Nuestro cuerpo.
If we make an enemy of the earth, we make an enemy of our own body. For the Mayan, the earth was a sacred being. For them, nature was benign and beautiful, yet frightening in its power. For theirs, after all, was a land of wild extremes of heat and cold, ringed with volcanoes and plagued by frequent earthquakes. The Mayan book of creation, the Popul Vuh, tells a story of how humans first came into this violent paradise. The earth will need nurturing. It will need bearers of respect for its divinity. And so it was human beings who were given memory to count the days and bear time's burden. Human beings who were responsible for maintaining the rituals, bonding nature, humanity, and the heavens. And if they ever ceased, the whole universe would cease to have meaning. In that myth in the Popul Vuh, perhaps there's a distant race memory of the migration of the ancestors of the peoples of the Americas, thousands of years ago from Asia. Even today, in the Guatemalan countryside, you can see rituals and beliefs shared with the people of China and East Asia. The use of jade in death rites, the symbolism of tortoise and bat, divination, and here the burning of prayers, ideas which go back even before language itself, back to some deep common root of humanity. Today's people of Central America partake of two very different conceptions of nature and civilization, the indigenous and the Western. But whatever their ancestry, they all still draw on that great past which developed untouched by the outside world till 1492.
Aproveche esta oportunidad que el Ministerio de Salud Pública está brindando nuevamente por medio de la...
The native past is still literally ever present. The great carved heads of gods or rulers stare impassively at the modern world, created by a culture which arose here around 1000 BC, the Olmecs. In the art of the Olmecs, from nearly 3,000 years ago, we can already feel the grave sensibility of the Central American universe. Stoical, but possessed of an inner strength which would enable its people to bear any burden, even one as heavy as the last 500 years. The first great flowering of Central American civilization took place in the first millennium AD in the Valley of Mexico. This is Teotihuacan, the place where men became gods. Here the early Mexicans built a vast city, center of a trading empire which extended all over Central America. And here, independently of the Old World, they built huge pyramids rivaling those of Egypt and Babylonia. Testimony that though separated so widely by time and space, the human mind still creates the same symbols, the same dreams of bridging the gulf between earth and heaven.
Sí.
See? It was the first time in 1971 that anybody had been in here.
And now an extraordinary discovery, made under the heart of the Pyramid of the Sun, has confirmed that an elaborate cosmic symbolism underlies the layout of the city. A narrow passage through the lava leads to a 7-pronged chamber, dead under the center of the pyramid.
So, Professor, where exactly are we now in relation to the pyramid?
This was the original pilgrimage place, which had dictated the siting of the pyramid above. It was the place of emergence of the first ancestors, alluded to in the later creation myth of the Maya, the Popul Vuh.
En el caso del Teotihuacano, como la mayor parte de las sociedades que conocemos para Mesoamérica, explican su cosmovisión y hablan de un lugar en donde vive el hombre, es la tierra. Sobre la tierra hay una bóveda celeste.
Humankind has always searched for an explanation of the phenomena of nature and the cosmos, says the excavator, Professor Roberto Gallegos. And here they turned the earthly city into a mirror image of the heavenly order.
So Teotihuacan was the first true urban civilization in Central America. And if we compare its origins with those of the first cities in ancient Iraq or India, or even better in Shang Dynasty China, then a common picture begins to emerge, at the heart of which is the idea of the city as an earthly pattern of the cosmic order. You can see it here with these great ceremonial axes intersecting in the 4 directions, aligned to the surrounding mountains and to the constellations, with the subterranean world represented by that primordial cave deep beneath our feet, under the very center of the pyramid, whose innermost recesses were illuminated by the sun every summer solstice. It's a ritual theater where humankind maintains the order of the universe. And here in Central America, cities retained that function, even though they might become centers of commerce and trade and so on. Ideology then became one of the driving forces in the development of civilization. Religious, social, political, call it what you will, they're intermingled at that time. And ideology is also the key to understanding that fateful change which came over humanity with the beginning of civilization, by which the few came to dominate the many, as is still the case across much of the world today.
The impetus of civilization now spread across Central America, from the Valley of Mexico to the rainforests of Guatemala and the Maya. At the time of Europe's Dark Age, splendid city-states arose here. The most intriguing
is Copan in Honduras. Copan was ruled by a talented dynasty from the 5th to the 9th century AD. Its public plazas, pyramids and ball courts, features shared by all Mayan cities, were here adorned with wonderful sculpture. Here the Mayan artists demonstrated a prolific imagination and a creative freedom which at times approaches a Western naturalism. The recent decipherment of Mayan writing enables us to do now what would have been impossible only a few years ago. Enter into the lives and even the feelings of the rulers commemorated here. Especially extraordinary is a series of portraits of a king we know by his hieroglyph sign as 18 Rabbit. Here's the fierce countenance of a man in his prime, his mid-40s, dated 11th of October, 721. Is it just our imagination, or is this not a softer expression, mellowed with age and experience? Late in July 736, this crude portrait, strangely sardonic, perturbed even. 2 years after this image was dedicated, 18 Rabbit was captured by a rival king and beheaded on the 3rd of May 738. He would have been in his early 60s. Writing was invented here independently as it had been in the Old World. Yet another clue to the common patterns in human development. And the greatest monument to Mayan literacy is the hieroglyphic stairway of Copan. It was literally a hill of signs, a huge stepped ramp 50 feet wide, 108 feet high, with well over 1,200 glyphs telling the mythic and dynastic chronology of Copan down to 755 AD, when it was dedicated by King Smoke Shell. It's the longest single written inscription in pre-Columbian America, a monument to writing and to time. The last known king of Copan, Yashpak, died in the winter of 820. The carving of the last date here was left unfinished on the 10th of February, 822. With that, the dynasty vanished and the city returned to jungle. A few peasants continued to farm here, but the land never again supported a city. Around the same time, Tikal too was deserted. Soon all the classic Mayan cities had gone. The Mayan collapse is still a great mystery. The land may have become exhausted, the environment destroyed. Perhaps the civilization simply lost its nerve. But the legacy carried on,
in the hearts and minds of the common people. And when the Europeans first stumbled on these ruins in 1848, the Indians living in the forest could still give their ancient name. Tikal. The place where the count of days was kept. Where the ancestors had borne the burden of time. With the collapse of the classic Maya, the focus of Central American civilization shifts back to its old heartland, the Valley of Mexico. Here, ringed by mountains, was a wide plain and a great lake with islands and fertile shores. Today it's all covered by Mexico City. Here, in the 14th century, a warlike tribe settled, who called themselves Mexica. The city they founded here, Tenochtitlan, was the precursor of the largest city on earth. Beneath today's streets, in the crypt of the cathedral itself, we can still tap the power of the culture which rose here in the 15th century. In one of the most dramatic episodes in human history, the Aztecs. The art of the Aztecs still holds a fearful fascination. An art of tremendous spirituality, but a spirituality of a kind unlike anything we recognize from our own civilization. This statue of the earth goddess Coatlicue, found here in 1790, was hastily reburied, fearing it might be seen by the youth of Mexico, fearing they might be exposed to its still, dark and potent magic. The present center of Mexico City, around the cathedral, was also the ritual center of the Aztec city. Excavation here since the 70s has uncovered the foundations of the Great Pyramid of the Aztec war god. This is where the Spanish under Cortés, when they sacked the city in 1521, saw horrific scenes of human sacrifice. The Aztecs believed that the gods needed blood and the hearts of human victims to nourish them in the struggle with the forces of darkness. Without them, the sun would cease to rise. And by the time of the Spanish conquest, thousands could die on this spot in a single ceremony. All round the site, the archaeologists found grim evidence of their devotions. These are stone representations of the skull racks on which the victims' heads were mounted. This is one of those places on Earth whose terrible associations still seem to linger. How was it then that a civilization of such brilliance
in the arts, in sculpture, in textiles and poetry could have been so committed to mass bloodletting and human sacrifice, so that in a 4-day festival 10,000 people could be dragged up the steps of the great temple here to have their hearts ripped out till the place was swimming in blood and reeking to the heavens. When the Spanish saw scenes like this, they thought that it must be literally the work of the devil. It was so wholly other. And yet, the Aztecs were only unique in the scale of their killing, for every human civilization has used sacrifice, especially in relation to religion. The theologian and the executioner have been intimates throughout history. The problem of the Aztecs then is a problem for all of us. To speculate, it would seem that the idea of the shedding of blood being necessary for the continuing of life became deeply rooted in our psyche during the thousands of generations we spent as hunter-gatherers in prehistory. So deeply rooted that bloodshed as a symbol is still the most powerful symbol of sacrifice today and can still erupt with atavistic power and violence. The scenes of frenzied killing which Cortés and his followers saw here, with their captured friends being dragged up the steps to their death, were, in a sense, proof of the Aztecs' piety, as Las Casas rightly saw. For uniquely among the great civilizations of the world, they raised solidarity with the universe above everything, including human life. In that, they couldn't be more different from the humanistic values of the great old world civilizations. To us, it may appear irrational, murderous in its brutality, and yet it is a mirror held up to our humanity, which we ignore at our cost.
By a 52-to-1 chance, Cortés had arrived in the Aztec year 1 reed, when their ancient prophecies said the god Quetzalcoatl would return from exile in the east. For the Aztecs, the coincidence drained away their will to resist. They immediately understood that these mysterious outside powers would be fatal to their own universe. On the terrible final night when Tenochtitlan fell, an omen appeared to the Aztecs, which for them symbolized the breakup of their mythic and cosmological order. That night, it began to rain, but more like a heavy dew than a rain. Then suddenly the omen appeared, burning like fire in the sky. It wheeled in spirals like a whirlwind, giving off light in showers of sparks like red-hot embers. It made noises, rumbling and hissing like metal on a fire. It circled the walls near the lake shore. It hovered over the temple, and then it moved out into the middle of the lake, where it vanished. No one cried out when the omen came into view. The people knew what it meant, and they watched in silence. After the conquest of Guatemala, the Spanish built their new capital, Antigua, in the shadow of the ancient sacred volcanoes. It was intended as a showcase of the ideals of European civilization. But the reality behind this humanistic facade was the greatest genocide in history. It's estimated as many as 90% of the native population of the Americas died of disease or violence in the first century of the conquest. As many as 50 million people. Among the Europeans who were horrified by what they saw was José de Acosta. The Spaniards must bear absolute responsibility for what is happening here, he wrote. We have betrayed in our deeds what we professed in our words. We have exploited and plundered these poor people, with no attempt to protect their human rights. We have not given them Christianity in sincerity, but under compulsion, fraud, and violence. The papacy itself urged on the enslavement of the natives in the name of Christ. But it was among the Catholic clergy that the European conscience grew. The greatest of these early liberation theologians was Bartolomé de las Casas, bishop here in Copan. A passionate defender of Indian rights, Las Casas' memory is still revered here. This is one of the few churches in Guatemala where even today the services are sung not in Spanish, but in Maya. Las Casas would take his case right up to the King and Queen of Spain themselves, urging on them justice for the Indians. And gradually he came to realize that his arguments against the enslavement of the Indians applied with equal force to the black slaves from Africa and all the oppressed peoples of the world.
There's an extraordinary sequel to this story of Las Casas. An incident which lights up the history of the 16th century like a flash of lightning and continues to illuminate us even today. In 1550, in Valladolid in Spain, there took place a public debate between Las Casas and the top Aristotelian philosopher, Sepúlveda. The questions at stake go right to the heart of the world's problems even today. In essence, what right does the First World have to dominate, enslave, or exploit the Third World? Are not these people, asked Las Casas, rational, feeling human beings with a soul just like the rest of us, entitled to equality of treatment? And Las Casas goes on to bring fascinating arguments from his study of Greek and Roman civilization to show that the city-states of Central America conformed in most respects to the Greek view of what an ideal state should be. Rational political entities entitled to respect, patience, persuasion, and again, kindness. No doubt Las Casas won the moral debate. But as the whole of subsequent history shows, the rulers of the West, the people with power and money, continue to view the indigenous peoples of the world,
from the Indians of Central America to the blacks of Africa, as what the Greeks, to their discredit, had termed natural slaves. The West's progress to civilization has been long and painful. It would be 150 years after the conquest that the last Mayan stronghold fell. In the remote jungles of northern Guatemala stood the island fortress of Flores, in Maya, Tayasal. The prophetic books of the Yucatan Maya foretold that catastrophe would revisit them every cycle of 13 katuns, 256 or 7 years. The next cycle was due to begin in 1697. Armed with that knowledge, the Spanish attacked on the 13th of March. In the middle of Lake Petén, they overcame the Mayan boats, obsidian-tipped arrows useless against Spanish armor and musket fire. Amid abandoned war canoes, they landed where only the previous year King Can Ek had greeted a Spanish embassy with flowers and music from drums and flutes. The last chapter in the long and dramatic history of the independent Maya was about to end. The defenders fled, and the Spaniards marched uphill to the top of the island, to the great temple of Tayasal.
It took the Spaniards a single day to destroy the 12 temples here on the island, to smash their thousands of idols, and to conclude in the evening by celebrating Mass here on the highest point amid the ruins of the great temple of Tayasal, where the church now stands. The last independent kingdom of the Maya had gone down. The locals here seem to have accepted this almost fatalistically as an inescapable result of their view of the repeating cycles of time. For 3 times since the 10th century, the cycle of 256 or 7 years had brought them catastrophe. That, in Maya eyes, was the true burden of time.
Today, the old cant still continues. The greatest catastrophe of modern Guatemalan history, the US-backed coup which overthrew their democracy in 1954, happened exactly 257 years after the fall of Tayasal. Today, the Maya, the majority of the population, still live dominated by a European elite. The recent guerrilla war left 40,000 dead and 1 million displaced. It is hoped that in the 1990s, with a new democracy, their history will take a different course. The Mayan strategy for survival remains stubbornly collective.
In great festivals like this at Zunil, they celebrate the saints as guardians of the community, not as Christian deities. For them, identity still resides in the collective values represented by ancestors and community. The European elites who have ruled Central America for so long had other views of past and future. One of Guatemala's modern dictators, Estrada Cabrera, expressed his faith in the values of European civilization by constructing concrete Parthenons all over the land, monuments to colonial progress, to the triumph of Greeks over barbarians. In the capital, Guatemala City, as all over Central America, the native culture has been swamped by the consumer values of the great neighbor to the north, Uncle Sam. In the city, the Indians are submerged, strangers in their own land. Widows of the Civil War, begging in the shadows. There's no going back in history. But who can contemplate such visions of future and past without a pang of loss? Here, where, as the creation myth, the Popul Vuh said, human beings had held the balance between the spirits of the ancestors and the spirits of earth and sky. In the Mayan calendar, today is the holiest of all days, Huashakip-Bats, 8 Monkey. And this morning, seemingly out of nowhere, thousands of ordinary Guatemalan Indians are converging in response to a call from a secret world of the spirit. For on this day of the year, the daykeepers will initiate new shamans who will carry on bearing the burden of time. In the 500 years since Columbus, these people have lived outwardly in Western time and Western history. And yet, all the while, they have patiently tended a secret universe. At times, it may have seemed that their obstinate, faithful care of the burden of time would be their downfall. But perhaps, after all, it has been their salvation. For it was the means by which they preserved identity itself, down to a new age of tolerance and pluralism, when Native Americans may again live in their own history, in their own time.